our Blackboard thing isn't working again, so we're just gonna film it on my phone. I'm gonna start with the questions. I got question 4. Wow, I cannot believe I agreed to do this question. Okay. So this one was that they see the world literally can affect our political behavior. So it said, like, how do liberals and conservatives tend to differ in terms of what they choose to focus on items of positive and negative stimuli? So there were like a bunch of different studies in this book that like pretty much said the exact same thing, but they did like a bunch, like some of the studies were like photos, and like one of the photos was negative and then one of the photos was positive, and then a dot would appear, and then they had to choose the photo with the dot, and like they used this to see like if you chose the dot super quickly, then that means that you were already focusing on the photo, so like you could do it quicker. And they found that conservatives took a lot longer reacting to the negative photos, and not a lot longer, might be, that was a different thing. They were quicker to find the dot when it was on the negative image because they were already looking at the negative image, while liberals took a little bit longer to click on the negative ones, but they were faster when it was on the positive photos. And then one of the other experiments that somebody did was with words. So then they had negative and positive words, and then it was like the colors of those words, and then you had to choose which color was for which thing, and then it pretty much said the exact same, well actually it said the opposite. Conservatives took longer reacting to negative words because they were more focused on them, while liberals took about the same amount of time to react to the positive and negative words. And then the flanker test was the photo one, and that's what proved the results. And then how do they react to the outside stimuli? Conservatives said that they were more likely to look where others were looking, so like they kind of followed along with it, where liberals said that they weren't influenced by others and they just did what they wanted to do. And then another one of the studies that they did was the space button, with the gazes of the cartoonist and like looking at you or looking at something else, and they said that liberals were slower to hit the button when the gaze was misdirected. Oh wait, that's supposed to say conservatives, might be. Conservatives were slower when they were asked to hit the button when like the gaze was misdirected, but liberals were more influenced by the social cues of it, so that they were quicker. And yes, that is all that I have. Does anybody else have anything else to add?
The study when the author was talking about the one that you brought up, where like where they look, I thought that was interesting because it's like they're not just like kind of setting a standard for like their own behavior, but like what they expect other people to do. So I think they asked him like, do you think it's more appropriate? I guess they asked him in that way. So it's like interesting that like they expect people, like if you were talking to a liberal and you were like staring, or they were staring the other direction, like they would want you to like ignore it. Yeah. But like with conservatives, they want you to like focus on what they're looking at too. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting.
I thought like it also brought back to the fact that how they were saying that liberals are like more open to like different things, and I think that plays like a really big like fact with this as well, because like if you're not going to follow like the direct norms of like looking where others look, like that makes sense for like, you know, having more of like a diverse food, or like the knowledge one, how they said like, oh, you're going to look up, like you're going to learn way more stuff even if you're not happy with what you're finding. So I thought it was like, I do think some of them are like correlated.
They definitely build on each other. Like, the way even the authors presented the information, it was very like they build on each other.
Okay. I didn't know to hand it back or not. Anybody else have any remarks on question 4? No? Okay. I'm just going to pass it along.
Alright. So I got question 7, and what do the authors mean when they suggest that liberals and conservatives may be better suited for particular environments? And I said the author states that conservatives are better suited for hunter-gatherer societies because of their high negativity bias, their loyalties, their tendencies to proceed with caution, and their suspicion of outsiders, while liberals are more suited for agricultural life because of their greater trust for others, so they can like trade with other communities, their exploratory behavior, and their more relaxed orientation towards negative elements. And the author also said that liberals and conservatives need each other because on page 224 they said they state that a mix of those with and without strong negativity biases, those willing and unwilling to take risk, and those welcoming and not so welcoming to outgroups makes for a stronger social group compared to a group entirely made up of one or another. So, yeah.
And they also say something about like personality, like traits, and how like liberals are like they're more willing, or I guess like kind of want to be in environments that are like unpredictable, or like they like to socialize with like a whole bunch of different people. But like conservatives tend to like their environments to stay the same. I feel like on a lot of issues you can kind of see that, like especially with like immigration and stuff like that. Like they want everything to stay like traditional and the same. Like they don't want other people like coming into their communities and changing things and stuff. So
yeah, I could definitely agree with you on that. And like a majority of their political beliefs are like always traditionalist, even like with same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
Like any like social reform.
yeah,
Like, they never want to go. Like
it definitely lends to like the personality, but I also think like their environment too.
And they're like against immigration, so like worry about
Yeah.
outsiders.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or like even like in cities and stuff, like cities are constantly changing. There's a whole bunch of different people around, like stuff like that. And like I feel like you're more apt to find like a lot of liberals like in a city urban area, because like that research kind of like builds on that.
That's true, and like also like what you were saying, I think that just adds on to like why liberals and conservatives need each other, because like you can't be like so far to one side and just like only live in that one. Like
Yeah.
you were saying, like the world is like changing like so much and everything, and I think like a group is like stronger if it's more diverse, just because like you're not supposed to see the world just through like one lens and everything,
Yeah.
because then it's like, what are you gonna like experience? It's like so ignorant, like yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
They said like they use it as an example.
I feel like she's gonna get motion sickness from
Hello.
us always moving.
Probably the same thing happened for
All right. So like in the book, they use the example of how like a body that hasn't been exposed to like different diseases, like your immune system is weak. And they talk about how a society of people that all have like the same way of thinking are easily susceptible to like, because they say how both sides have their pitfalls. Like there's times when you need to be compassionate, and there's times where you need to be like cold and analytical. So when you bring them together, it's like an immune system working to defend like everyone, instead of as much fun as it would be to like be surrounded by people who all like support your views. There's like a practical function for having people oppose you, and that's where you get like the best. Everyone's competing ideas for how to solve a problem is how you get the best solution to that problem.
Yeah.
Anyone want to comment on that?
They also talked about like New York, and like how like before like 9/11 it was a lot more like liberal and everything, and then like after 9/11 it was more conservative just because of like the circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think it said like instead of like everyone just being flexible with their views, like they really just need like a mix to everything to be like easier and more like efficient in the way that we like work in our society. So yeah.
I think I'm next, right? Okay. So I got 3. The authors link our political attitudes to our sense of taste and smell. Specifically, the authors state that when it comes to taste and preferences, humans are not that different from fruit flies. What do they mean by this? In addition to the author's assertion that taste buds can help explain political predispositions, they also say that politics has an odor. What do they mean by this? And be sure to use examples in your answers. Okay, so like as far as like the fruit flies thing, like they were talking about how like they had like 2 types of beer or whatever, and then like they like exposed the fruit flies to it. Like I don't remember exactly like the whole thing, but that was like the point. But they say variations in taste and preferences can lead to individual differences in attitudes and behavior. So just as fruit flies have a taste for beer is biologically based and related to their behavior, human tastes are often biologically based and related to their behavior, like right down to political orientations. And the example that they used, like that was really interesting, was during the campaign when Barack Obama was like, have you seen like the price of arugula? Like it's so expensive. And John McCain was like, oh, well, like only well-educated liberals would be able to like go into Whole Foods and like buy that stuff. Like, you know, I'm just like you, like I just eat steak and potatoes and stuff like that. I thought that was a really interesting like part, because it's kind of like true, like because they talk about how like liberals are more likely to be vegetarians, they're more likely to try exotic foods, and like conservatives are very traditional, they like are staunch meat eaters, and they're more likely to eat traditional American foods. So I thought that was really interesting how like our taste for like certain foods are kind of draw back to like our political orientations, because like you said, like they like their environment constant, they like it to be like conservatives, like, and to be really traditional. So like it makes sense that they wouldn't want to like go outside their comfort zone and try a lot of foods and stuff. And then as far as like smell, they so like each person experiences the world differently due to variation in biological makeup from person to person. What may smell bad to one person may be unnoticeable to the next. And the study that they were talking about, how like conservatives are more likely to pick up odor than liberals. So I thought it was interesting they made like the point to say like smell is very connected to like economic status. So if you think of like perfume and like colognes, like an average like everyday person like working like a 9-to-5 job is not going to be able to afford like Gucci or Versace like perfume. So I thought it was interesting that conservatives can pick up on that like odor very fast, and it's like a way the person smells, you can kind of distinguish like their economic status and like who they are and stuff like that. So I thought it was interesting that like conservatives can make that, like they can tell like way faster than liberals can, because it would probably matter more to them in a way, I guess. I don't know if that's just my bias, but I think it would matter more to them, because like especially like in environments like conservatives, like the odor of the city, like after a while, like I don't even notice it anymore. Like there's some spots here that smell bad, but like my mom is always talking about how it smells bad, like in Richmond, like all the time, and I don't notice it, but like I can understand like why conservatives, when they say like they would rather be like in the rural places, not really in the city, because of that smell. It's kind of linked to like economic status, if that makes sense. I feel like it's not making sense.
Also like sound too. Like
Yeah.
I noticed like in the city, like when I'm here and like when I go back home to like more like suburban areas,
Yeah.
it's a lot more quiet.
Yeah.
And like I feel like conservatives might be like into like the quiet and like,
Yeah.
that stuff. But I also think it kind of talked about like the genetic side of like humans, and like how like the male hormone of like sweat, like some people can smell and some people can't. It's just like a gene, which I think some of the fruit flies had to do with like genetics. So like some females like are like attracted to like, I know it's gross, like male like sweat, like it can either like smell like urine or like a vanilla thing. But it's all around like just like genetics. So like even like the smell of the city might be different to like someone else, you know.
Also, a little quick comment. I don't know how to pronounce it, but they specifically talked about, I'll just read the quote. It says that we found that variations across people in the ability to detect the odor of androstenone, I think that's how you say it, predicts political attitudes such as those more sensitive to the odor of androstenone are also more comfortable with clear social hierarchies. I don't know what androstenone is, but
There was also the experiment on like the taste, and it was like Jamie Neiman. He did a study up with like based on a past study with the PTC and like the tasting of the PTC, which is like really similar to like the smell one, except it's just like some people don't taste it and other people don't taste it. But then they said people who taste it are more likely to be conservative than liberal, which I found interesting, just because based off of like other things, I feel like going back with like what they were saying with like liberals about how like they're like more open to try new foods and they eat a lot more things. So I wonder what it is in the PTC that like makes conservatives taste it more so than others, because I feel like liberals would have more of like what is it called? Like a
palette.
yeah.
And also really too, like conservatives would know like what's not normal.
That is also true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like hard because like it's like they're like grouping people.
I know that they talk about how like it's not like they're making these like claims, you know, they're just kind of like presenting the data and stuff. But yeah, it's like really like hard. I don't know. Because, like, I feel like in all of our minds, we know, like, kind of what a conservative person, but at the same time, that's, like, stereotyping everyone.
I think
Yeah.
another hard thing, too, is, like, they're, like, doing studies on people that, like, have already been, like, predisposed to, like, their beliefs and to all their stuff. So it's, like, yeah, there might be some, like, correlation with it, but, like, I feel like you need to test this stuff on kids.
I also feel like with the taste thing that, like, maybe it could be, like, you know how they're talking about, like, if it's, like, your political views are there, like, in your DNA, or if it's, like, your upbringing. And I feel like your taste is based on your upbringing. Like,
Definitely.
If you were only fed, like, meat and potatoes as a kid, you're not going to want to try other things growing up.
I agree with that. Coming from a very white family, we only ate, like, white American food. So I had never had any cultural food until I got here. And, like, I was incredibly picky. Like, super picky with the stuff that I would eat. But it's gotten better. If anybody's wondering.
I'll make one last comment. Question. So, they talk about taste. Obviously, they talk about food. That's like when you hear taste, that's the first thing you associate it with. But they talk about like art, poetry, comedy, music, movies, and like the brand of car you're likely to drive. So, and then they make a point that like none of these things individually are like indicative of what you're gonna believe politically, but they're all statistically significant, like showing that I don't know, left-leaning people prefer one thing while conservatives prefer something else. So like people who are skeptical of this would be easy to point out that like there are exceptions, but like it's important that like the author makes a point that none of these are normative. Like they're not trying to say that everyone who does these things goes one way, but there's like a significant reason to believe that it has a strong impact, which is like, and then I think they talk about that's one of like the later questions is like, are you convinced? And it's like he's not trying to say that these things always happen. He's showing that there's like significance. But yeah.
And like also I think like you're saying to like have the conversation about like how like the kids like grow up and stuff. Oh, this is a really bad angle, sorry. Of how like the kids grew up. Like if you're growing up in like a liberal household and you're experiencing, like he was saying, like not just food but like arts and things like that, like you're probably going to be more open-minded to that idea. So it'll kind of like push you more to like being a liberal or like whatever. I'm not saying like that's like definitely, because I know people that have like conservative parents but they're liberal, but like I think it like sways them as they're growing up. Anybody else before I go on to okay, so I got 6 and I think that goes into, I think number 6 is like the one that's like nurture. Yeah, it is. So I guess that kind of goes into the question. So 6 says the authors argue that asking whether individuals are shaped by nature or nurture misses the mark. That question relies on a false dichotomy and is thus too narrow because, in fact, we are shaped both by nature and nurture, and at times they are inextricably linked. Discuss the way twin studies contribute to our understanding of the role of nature and the inheritance of our political attitudes, and discuss at least one study that suggests nurture plays a role in the cultivation of our attitudes by affecting our biology. So there were like multiple twin studies that were discussed, but so on page, I don't know if this is like the correct page because like I got the book online, but on my version it was like page 142, and it said the blockbuster implication of course is that social attitudes including political temperament are genetically influenced. So like people just think it's like by your parents and stuff, and then on that same page it goes on to say that political temperament in short seems to be at least partially heritable. So like I think it's just saying that it's not like one or the other, it's not nature or nurture, but it's like a mix of both of them on how like you view things politically. And then one study that like stood out to me was a study done by the authors, and it was like I don't know like how to say the full name, but like DZ twins and MZ twins. And so like the DZ twins grew up together, they wore the same clothes, they shared the same bedroom, and they had the same friends, so like their environment was completely the same. And then the MZ twins just had like different environments. And then on page 144 it said that the results show that variations in environmental similarity don't make much of a difference, at least in terms of political attitudes, because the MZ twins with very dissimilar environments are still much more alike politically than DZ twins with very similar environments. So I guess it's like, I mean, it's just like reinforcing the fact that it's not just nature or nurture that shapes your political views. And then like for me, like me and my sister like grew up in the same environment, and I mean, we're not twins, but like we're just like 2 years apart, and like my parents are like kind of Republican, and my sister kind of is too, but I'm like completely opposite of them. But we literally had like the same upbringing. We honestly did have the same friends and everything too. So like, yeah, I really just don't think it's like one or the other.
Yeah, on page 150, it says like both genetics and the environment matter, and it is not necessarily even possible to declare one winner. And that's like one thing that I think like was like a good thing to wrap up with that like section, because I feel like a lot of times we're so much looking for like that one answer, like a clear yes or no, but like sometimes it's like a little bit of both, a little bit of one or the other. Like I think a lot of these like questions kind of boil down to it's like it's the individual. Like I don't know what question it was, but it was the Milgram experiment or whatever about authority. It's like I guess the authors are like pointing out like it's not that like everyone has this tendency to obey like no matter what, but it's really just comes down to like you as an individual. And I feel like politics is very much like that. Like you kind of think that everybody has like the same views as you if you're like liberal, but it really comes down to like that individual person and like their environment and like how they're raised or who they're around and stuff like that. So yeah.
I have an example for the nurture side, like what they explained. I don't know if you guys heard of like the 3 identical twins experiment, and basically what they did is they like took these like 3 twin babies and they put them in different environments, one in like a middle class, one in like a higher class, and one in a working class. And what question is this? 6? Okay, sorry. And yeah, like they noticed like some similarities, like when they would like smoke a cigarette, they would pick like the same flavor of the cigarette. And just like different weird personalities, but it was mostly just the environment. Like the middle class one dealt with like mental illness and eventually like committed suicide and stuff like that. So they just realized that like nurture was over nature, but there is like some aspects of like just like genetics, but overall they noticed that it was more like nurture.
One of the things that they talked about, especially like with the twin studies, they were talking about like the difference between identical and fraternal twins, is that like predictably like identical twins who had like closer, hers like genetics were like more similar, had more similarities between them later on in life than the fraternal twins did. But they talk about how you can't really separate nature versus nurture, because how you interpret your nature is determined, how you interpret your like nurture, your surroundings, is determined by your like natural genetic makeup, like your likelihood to find something either like tasty or disgusting, like so to separate those two would be like forgetting the role that genetics plays in the first place. So the nature versus nurture debate is like kind of misplaced or not described well.
Another thing they talked about in the book was like they had those 2 girls that were like separated at the hospital, like they were given to the wrong families, and that one girl was like one of the girls, like they went to different families, and one of the girls' families would always bite their nails, and their daughter, who was at the other family, started biting her nails too, even though their family, like her fake family, like no one bit their nails. So that's just like another reason that like nature does still impact, even no matter like where your family is.
Okay. Alright. Put this up so I have like a better angle than my double chin. Alright. So I had question 2, and the question is, the author begins the chapter by talking about the research conducted by Milgram and Zimbardo. What do the authors of Predisposed find problematic about the way most people often interpret the results of the studies, and what do you think that the takeaway of the studies should be instead? How do you relate to their approach to studying predispositions and the way they alleviate fears and criticisms about the controversial approach to studying politics? So I'll just talk about like the Milgram and Zimbardo like experiment for a little bit. So the Milgram one was more like there was a subject who had to like ask this person like behind like a wall or something like 4 words, and he would have to like memorize those words, and if he didn't, they needed to be shocked, and like each shock would like amplify more and more up to like 450 voltage, and they found that like 65% of them would go all the way up if they didn't hear or like see the results of like the subject behind the wall, and then like 62.5% if they could hear but not see would go all the way up, and if they could both hear it, like if they could hear and see the results, it would be 40%. And so they just found that the studies, like roughly 1/3 of all people were strongly inclined to obey the authority, no matter what like painful implications for innocent others. And then another third was more like resistant. So basically what like you said, kind of like the results kind of skewed it to make them seem like more like evil, and like, oh, like, I don't know, certain people like what they'll do to like obey someone, but it really comes down to like what you find to be like too far, and like the way you like hear things and test things, how it will like affect you, and like when will you like take like obeying over like your own self, I guess. And the Zimbardo was like the same thing. I'm not really gonna explain it that much, but it was just more of like a role thing. Will you like obey the role of like being like a prisoner, or like what was it, like a cop or something like that? And how far will you go? And that just depends on like your own self. So I think maybe the results kind of made a bias among like people overall, but it might just be the individual themselves. Yeah, I didn't have like too much on it, but yeah. Okay.
Like after they talked about the 2 like experiments, they linked it to like the economic theory of rational choice theory, which I thought was pretty interesting, and it makes a lot of sense, I think, in the case, because like the rational choice theory is like every person is going to act in self-interest to maximize their benefit, and they gave the example of like taking $20 from somebody, but it goes back to the fact that like everybody, like what kind of just like exactly what you were saying, like everybody thinks differently and is inherently different, so therefore like what they do is different. But then for like the Milgram and like the Zimbardo one, I know more about the Zimbardo one just because I've like researched it myself, but like for that one, like a lot of it, it's so interesting how like psychology can really play a role into how you're gonna act. But like I know, or even for the Milgram one, like they weren't even like saying like the full things like within their statement and like finding their reportings, because if you just read the basics of it, like it doesn't say that they can't see them, can't hear them. It's just like, oh yeah, they're all gonna do it just because authority says like the one thing to do it. But I mean, I definitely agree. It just kind of goes back to more of like who you are as a person and like how that interplays with it. But I do think it kind of like relates to it, just because I feel like like a what word am I looking for? Like a reoccurring theme is that like conservatives are like more linked to negative things and negative attributes. So I feel like they bring this up to the case to see if there's more of a link between just like conservatives being assholes or not. But I don't know. I thought it was interesting, but I do think like some of it was definitely problematic, like within like their actual findings and how they showed the findings and like reported them.
Yeah. Also, like the person who conducted the experiment too, like they knew what they were getting into, and kind of like steering these people to like really obey, because I think they're almost like interrogating them during the experiment. I know I watched like a video. I don't know, but I mean it's fine. But yeah, I just know it was like super controversial, and they knew what they were getting into like trying to skew up their like minds and everything. So that was like more like fucked up for them, you know, and like realizing the person that they are, and to like see that there are people that are like willing to obey anything, you know, and for them to like know that is like kind of like fucked up.
Yeah. For the Milgram experiment too, like when they originally would say no, like which way was this thing turned? This way. Sorry. They would like try to like convince them to keep going, you know, and that's like a big thing. Like you can't, like if somebody's saying no, like you should stop it right there, not like. But I do think that they were trying to like find the like link.
Kind of push them to an extreme, yeah.
Yeah, but like I feel like that's just like skewing your results when like you're sitting there like you have to do it, you have to press the button, rather than just being like, oh, okay, you want to stop now, that's fine. Like I feel like they would have got more real results doing that rather than.
Because I've seen like a video, because it's like reading like criminal justice or whatever, and I've seen a video and like they like this like one guy like literally freaks out, like he's like it's hurting him, like we have to stop, like what is wrong with you, and he's like please sir, like just continue the experiment, like we have to finish, like I can't let you leave until we finish. And it's like of course you're gonna get like people who like one just want to like finish it so that they can leave, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's when you kind of like mess up like your results, because it's like people aren't doing it innately off of like what they think is like they should do, but really like I want to leave, this situation's uncomfortable, like I'll do anything to go. So
it's like torture in a way.
yeah.
They also didn't tell them, like, at the end of the person. Like, they didn't say it was, like, experiment, so, like, a bunch of people left thinking they just, like, killed someone.
You know what's interesting about that? I learned this in one of my classes, is that the only, because they did it, like, all demographic groups, and, like, old, young, like, people of color, like, white people and stuff, and the only, like, group that they would not, like, go higher on the voltage on, like, the student or whatever, was, it like, they put a dog in there, and, like, the people were like, yeah, no, we're not doing this to a little puppy. I thought that was really interesting.
And I think how it can relate to like politics is like what we will do to like obey like whoever like we're siding with, like our parents or like anyone that we really look up to.
That's like a good like Rob Northam. Like to what point will Democrats like
having the fear of just like being like, no, like I don't really follow this.
Yeah, that's how those like Nazi regimes and stuff
Yeah.
started.
That's true. And okay, sorry. I took like psychology, and like we studied both of these experiments in depth, and like with the Milgram one was like the one where they were like electrocuting or like whatever people write, so like when we were studying it, my teacher was saying how like that, like the whole point was like just to see how far they'll go to like obey like an authoritative figure who's telling them to do it, because like realistically like they can stop, like nothing's gonna happen to them like if they stop, but it's just supposed to be like how far they'll go, like you were saying with like the whole like Nazi thing, like how far will you go just to like support somebody who's like an authoritative figure. And then like that brings up the whole question of like ethics and like how far you should go for like just an experiment and stuff to realize that. But like with the whole Zimbardo thing and being like, I think like the experiment was just like a blanket statement saying like people like will do like inhumane things if they're like forced or put in certain situations, but like I think you were saying how like that's more of an individual choice and an individual thing. When we were studying that, and then like also there's a like a movie documentary type of thing on Netflix about it, but it was like one of the guards, like the guard who like started beating them and like was like tried to be the head of the guards and stuff, in his like own life he was like a loser, like he literally had like no family or friends, nobody would ever listen to him, he was never like held a job, never in a leadership position, so it's like when he got that opportunity he just like kept pushing like for it and stuff. So like how, but some of the other guards who like were like not like a CEO but like a higher up like in a company, like they didn't do it. So yeah, I think that just like speaks to like the whole individual thing about like
also with the Zimbardo experiment, I feel like it relates to that Abu Ghraib prison we read about in the last book, where like they were in Iraq and they were just torturing people. That's probably because like they were far away and like the government couldn't like actually see what they were doing, and they just had a ton of power and just started running away with it. Okay, I got one. The question is,
Politics are simultaneously unique to the time period, region, etc. being discussed, yet universal across time, place, etc. What is meant by this? What are the bedrock social dilemmas and first principles of politics, and how do they help make sense of this seeming contradiction? So I said, though traditional wisdom asserts that politics varies and human nature is universal, in truth, it's actually politics is universal and human nature varies. Political orientations are connected to deep physiocognitive predispositions in a broadly predictable fashion. The first principles of politics reflect divisions in the underlying first principles of politics, core preferences about the organization, structure, and conduct of mass social life. All social units face the same need to resolve certain social dilemmas, and then bedrock social dilemmas. Those are all social units face the same need to resolve certain social dilemmas. Some prefer more hierarchical decision-making, while others prefer egalitarian arrangements. Some believe in share and share alike, while others believe in taking care of your own. Some see outgroups as threats, while others see them as potential sources of friendship and new knowledge. Basically, just the core of that is that people want to fix the same issues, but their predisposed political orientations meet each other with bedrock social dilemma in terms of how they should go about solving issues. And then the second part of that question is, can you think of examples of ways that past political issues have differed from those we experience today, yet still...
Hey guys, would you guys like some Red Bull?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Actually, yeah.
I kind of messed that up. I didn't know what I thought was going to happen.
Oh, thank you. Fun.
Cheers.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. So the second part of that question was, can you think of examples of ways that past political issues have differed from those we experience today, yet still fall under the same universal umbrellas discussed by authors? I said I believe issues such as gun rights, for example, is an example that's always been around, yet is discussed more often when, there's like a mass shooting or something like that. But I feel like it's an issue that's always been around, but like it kind of comes and goes when there's like an incident that happens. I said it falls under this universal umbrella because it is a hot topic issue right now, but it eventually fades off a little bit and then comes back. So, does anybody have anything else to
This
add?
question made me think of the question of does history actually repeat itself? Because I remember when I was taking IR, Saladino was saying he doesn't believe history repeats itself because in his opinion, he was in order for history to repeat itself, it has to be literally every specific detail has to be the same, which I can see that point of view, but I think it repeats itself in some ways, and with whole okay, for example, everything that happened with the Holocaust and Jews being sent into concentration camps, that's happening to Muslims right now in China. It's not the full extent of what happened with Jews and how many of them, but it's happening, and nobody is really doing anything about it. But it's still kind of the same umbrella of things that are happening.
Yeah, all right. So, actually, it's funny that you mentioned Saladino. No, I remember he said history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, which is pretty clever because it's of course it's not everything down to the letter repeating itself, but there are themes that we've seen repeated through history. One of the examples that I thought of was we still have to face political issues like waste management. In Egypt, the first attempt to manage waste was telling people where they could poop. Pretty much is you can't poop upstream, just not to contaminate the city's water supply. And then we still see that today. We say where you can and can't dump waste and chemicals, and how much you can dump. So obviously it's different time periods, but they're still trying to address the same problem to keep the population healthy. So we face different issues, but we come up with similar solutions, even though it's more advanced. chime in.
Like, I don't know. It kind of just bases off of like we all have like the same bigger topics, like almost like civil rights, and like now we have like LGBTQ. I don't even. Oh my god, I suck. Okay, but just like social rights and everything, and like also like global warming too. Like that was always like kind of a thing, but now it's getting more prevalent because we're starting to notice more things with like the technology that we have now. And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to talk.
I think like even if you go back to like I took Latin back in high school and we learned about this a lot, like slavery. Like slavery was a very predominant thing back in Latin culture, except it wasn't like Africans, it was like British people being enslaved. And so then you look at it here again, you know, with us, we had slavery, and then now it's more of just like not necessarily slavery, but still like a discrimination like against other people. So it's like I definitely like kind of what you said, like it rhymes, it's not exact, but I think even like some of them are exact. Like you look at all past wars, like wars are all very similar as to why they get started, how they're like dealt with. Like it's just the style of fighting changes in different ones. Like we've had wars since like before anything, you know. So yeah, or even like global warming, like we had the thing that froze everything. And then, you know, before dinosaurs happened, you know, that thing. Yeah. And then now it's like we're just killing our planet again. So I think it'd be really hard not to, like, agree with the fact that, like, there are similarities within everything. Like, it doesn't just go away. Yeah. Especially with our type of government.
And then I think it's interesting though, like, the one thing I have in here is, like, human behavior is distinct, but politics is constant. So it's like, So like, that, and then the quote on page 39 says, even the concept of left and right as a means of university organizing political preferences seem to be bound by time and culture. And I think like the more people that I meet, like especially like here, who aren't like necessarily from the US or like didn't grow up here, it's like really interesting to see how like their take on social issues, because it's very much like linked to culture and like tradition and like historical stuff. So I think like, yeah, politics is constant, but like human behavior and how people like I guess react to like certain issues is like very distinct to the person.
Yeah. And then it also talks about like the three like social dilemmas and how it all is like based off of that. So like the first one's like degree of adherence to traditional values and moral codes. So that could be like for like the war and everything. And like it also has like an index where like you can like tell like which one you are. So they had one like society works best when people live according to traditional values, and then people adjust their values to fit changing circumstances. The second one is like treatment of outgroups and rule breakers. And I'll just keep going. And then the third one's just the role of group and individuals. So yeah, I think that kind of plays a role with like all the examples that we explained.
Yeah.
I can I'll start off the next question. So I got number 5. 5 was like just like a lot of questions in there, so I'm gonna split it up. So the first part of question 5 was, are the authors of Predisposed comfortable making normative judgments about the link between predispositions and political attitudes? And they make it very clear that, like, even though you can demonstrate that certain traits are more common among people who share a certain political ideology, it's not like the point of their research to make a normative conclusion, and it's not appropriate to make a normative conclusion because they're showing that there's a significant correlation, which shouldn't be taken to think that all people who like arugula have to vote for Obama. But people outside of the scientific community can easily hear things like probability and like related to and think like it's not proven, but like it is. The research like pretty thoroughly proves that there is a connection, just that the fact that you can't make a normative conclusion is what some people will focus on and like try to disprove all this research with. The second part of the question was, do the authors believe that most individuals judge predispositions in a normative way? And I said that like everyone has tendencies to categorize people based on their behavior, and like we assign normative conclusions on data that we see, and when you're first meeting a person, the fewer times you interact with them, the less data you have to go off of, so your normative conclusions are going to be less accurate than if it's someone that you know well. Then you gather like a large data sample, and then you start to arrive at more accurate conclusions of what that person is like. And then this ties into like the concept of hard and soft categorizers. Like there's people who will have an interaction with someone, and then maybe they were having a bad day, maybe they're not always like that, and then there's people who could categorize that as like, no, that was just a bad person, like they're mean. And then of course there's a study in the book, I think we already talked about it, like the people who are more likely to soft and hard categorize. And the last part was, how does it relate to the way our learning process differs across the political spectrum? What examples do they use to explain these concepts? Those who choose between options, those who choose like in between options, looking for a gray area solution, like the soft categorizers we were talking about, are more likely to be liberal, and then hard categorizers are likely to be conservative. And then this can relate to learning because there are obviously fields like STEM fields like science, technology, where there are yes or no solutions to certain problems, but then in like the arts and like history, there's more like gray areas and like arguments and back and forth of like what you can believe. So there's like obviously there's two different mindsets that could help you out depending on like which field of, I don't know, education you're focusing on.
They like had also mentioned for the learning thing that like liberals gain information even if they don't like what they find, and even if like they're not able to fully absorb the information, like they're still going to keep collecting the information and learning it, while conservatives acquire information that they believe is necessary to draw a conclusion. And they're more like they gave an example of like conservatives reading a sentence saying that somebody did something or like borrowed something from like a DVD and then like never returned the DVD, and then conservatives were found to gain more of a negative impression based off of that person just reading that compared to liberals. Which I think, again, like this goes back to like, you know, like the taste thing, the smelling thing, that like conservatives like want to stick within like their traditional norms and their traditional values. And I definitely see where like the acquiring information comes from, like just relating it back to like climate control. Like still so many conservatives are like so quick to say like, oh, that's fake, like we're fine, where like there's like literal like scientific proof that says otherwise, where like liberals, like that's like pretty much on like everybody's like public agenda for like climate control and helping it because of what science has said. And like they obviously can like see that that's a bad thing, but are willing to like continue to learn more about it. Or even like same-sex marriage, you know, like liberals are always the first ones to like be like, yeah, we need it, like let's do it, because it's like outside of that traditional male versus female or immigration. Like I just think if you look at like any of the policy agendas, like you can clearly see like the differences in like the way that they're learning and like how they're assessing their information and like using it to form their agendas.
Yeah. I think like abortion is like a good example of like hard and soft like categorizing, just because like a lot of conservatives will be like, no, abortion is just a moral wrong, like that's like nothing else, like it's like is or isn't, it's like yes it is. But liberals are more likely to like think about the relevant like information behind like what may lead a woman to like seek an abortion, or like how like just like how that person got to that decision. But I feel like conservatives are more like, no, like fuck the background information, like it doesn't matter. And I feel like it's like that on a lot of issues, especially when it comes to like criminal justice and like treatment of the offender and stuff. It's like, no, they did something wrong, it really doesn't matter. But it's like, okay, well, like they grew up in a really impoverished area, didn't have like a lot of access to education or like good role models and stuff like that. So I think like that kind of I don't want to say like sums up like what liberals and conservatives are, but it kind of does. So
Yeah, I think it, like both of what you guys said, like kind of does. And the author, oh shoot, I just lost it. 1 second, sorry. So in the book it said liberals are more likely to be flexible even to the point of not performing the task exactly as the authorities intended, but like conservatives are more likely than liberals to lock onto a task and complete it in a fashion that's definitive and consistent with instructions. So like I think that shows how conservatives are more like you guys were saying, like traditional, and they're kind of like just don't really question like what they're doing. They're like, I'm just gonna stick to like what I believe in and like whatever. But liberals are like, they kind of like want to gather like more information and then like sort of make an opinion like off of all that information, and they're like more open to like questioning everything and like even questioning like our government and like just like the system overall. That's all.
mm-hmm. For number 8.
Start, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to start it like over there, or do you want me to?
Yeah, we can.
Do you want to start it first and then we'll go on?
Question 8 was, are you convinced by the evidence and discussion provided by the authors in order to back up their thesis that innate biological predispositions can impact our political attitudes and behaviors? Why or why not? How do you think their conclusions should inform the way we speak about politics, whether as citizens or as political scientists? I thought the things that they had were, it was like definitely interesting. Like I definitely could see like the correlation, but again, it's like correlation versus causation. Like I think nurturing plays definitely more a role than nature. Like, you know, you look at the twin studies, you look at like the food and stuff, like in my personal belief, like I think like knowledge can fix anything. Like if you can like look at the facts and believe the facts, so there's no reason why you couldn't change like your opinions on stuff. So for me, like it would just be really hard to convince me otherwise that like nature plays a bigger factor in that, just because like me myself, like I remember like when Black Lives Matter first came out, like I had no idea what that was. Like I was super confused by that, but then, you know, like through me like researching it and like listening to other people, like I was able to like understand it and be like, oh yeah, Black lives do matter, you know what I mean? Like more so than like all lives matter or like the police one, whatever it is, blue lives matter. But like I just think that like, you know, to a certain extent, yeah, like nature definitely does play a big factor into it, like based off of like, you know, just like inherent things, but at the end of the day that doesn't define anything for like anybody. And like even like they had mentioned in the book that, you know, like a lot of these experiments like do show something, but it's not exactly a causation, and a lot of it refers more to like the individual person and like their beliefs more so than the nature aspect of it.
Yeah.
So like I don't know, I thought it was interesting, but it didn't necessarily convince me at the same time.
Yeah, I think like one thing I hear a lot is like the political is the personal, and like I really believe that like politics is definitely like something that's super personal to you, and like what like the best example I can like give is like both my parents are veterans, so like I'm really like I guess involved in like veterans' rights and like what like transitioning out of the military and stuff like that, whereas like someone who has never had contact with the military like probably wouldn't like pay attention to those type of issues as much. So I think it's like really personal, but it was like hard for me sometimes to like as I was like going through and like reading it, and I was like, okay, well, do I do that? Like I consider myself liberal, so I was like, do I do that? But like some of them, like I'm a super picky eater. Like I'm really open to like new experiences, but I am like a crazy picky eater. So like I guess that would make me, I don't know, like just certain things like that like, well, and I know that they say like it's not for everyone, it's not like these are facts, like they're not, I guess, like hard categorizers, but some of them I don't know, I don't know, so I don't know even like if I believe every single thing that they were talking about or not, but I don't know.
Yeah, there was like some thing that said like, oh, it's genetic because the people that like find their mates, they're both the same, like liberal or conservative, so it's like technically genetic, but it's like really not, because they had to get there somehow, like environment and like what they talked about with like smell, like having people like be against gay men or like something like that. It was like weird experiments, like maybe but like that's not what they probably think, like that's not probably what they really like wanted to say. And I think nurture does play a big role, because for me, like I technically, like I don't really have a lot of knowledge in politics, like I'm just taking this class for an elective, and for me like my bias is like super extreme and I know that, but like reading this kind of like helped me like realize like, oh, like some things are just me, and like some things, like if I had more knowledge I would be able to like maybe like switch my views. So I think it just depends on like, yeah, like the person you are, but like the person you like are surrounded with, and like I think it does like matter on your parents too, but I don't think anything really on genetics. I didn't really believe that at all.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, like the biological part of it, because I think like a lot of the reasons why people are the way they are is like their environment, like how they grew up and like who they grew up around and stuff like that. Like you hear all the time like, oh, I didn't even really think about that until I met this person who's a part of like this community and stuff like that. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe like your openness to even like hear that person out,
right.
maybe biological.
And also like social media too. Like social media is super biased, and like our environment is basically social media, you know?
Yeah.
So being easily like following certain like accounts is basically your environment. So it just depends on like the people that you follow and like who influence you the most. Is like the environment that you decided. Hey, okay. Sorry. But yeah. Okay.
So like, this was like kind of related to, like my univ class freshman year. We had a unit on, it's like different philosophers talking about free will, and then at the end of it was like, so this teacher like completely convinced us that none of us had free will, and then at the end of it, like the final essay was like, explain like, do you still think you have free will? And I think like a point that this author makes is that like everyone's actions can be somehow like attributed to either genetics, nature, or like some combination, which is troubling when you think of like in terms of politics. Like, is everyone like gonna believe what they're gonna believe no matter what? And in a way, yes, but at the same time, like we can't possibly know what is and isn't gonna persuade someone, so it doesn't change the fact that we should try to educate people, and most people are like reasonable, I like to think. So like giving someone new information, whether or not it's gonna like change their political view, it's just the fact that it's like more likely to, is like why it still matters to inform people. But I don't know, because like I've never thought of it in terms of political beliefs. Like every action you've ever taken is like can be traced back to like a prior experience you had, and that experience can be traced back to something before that, and then so like everything was like set into motion like long before we started doing anything. And then it's kind of concerning when you think of like political engagement, and when people think that their vote doesn't matter. It's like extra hopeless when you think that like people can't even control their opinions. So it's kind of a dark way to think about it.
And then to like kind of answer the second part of the questions about how like it says, how do you think their conclusions should inform the way we speak about politics? I think just like, I mean, everything that you guys were saying, like when you speak about politics, I think you should like realize that you probably are coming from some sort of bias, like whether it's like biological or like your environment or like whatever the situation is. But you also have to realize that like so is somebody else. And like you have to realize like they're coming from like a certain background, and like maybe they haven't been exposed to like something of your opinion or like whatever. So you have to like, when you speak about it, like you shouldn't speak about it like, oh, like I know more than you, and like actually you're wrong in your entirety, and like everything you're saying is just bullshit. Like you should like actually try to inform the person instead of like just being right, because I think like politics today, a lot of it is like I just want to be right, or like I just want like to win or something, whether or not you're like actually informing the person or not.
Yeah, I agree. And I think going off of the thing that you were saying about biases, I think another reason for me it's like really hard for me just to like sit back and believe like, oh yeah, it's all nature, is because like all the experiments are biased based off of the fact that these people already have their predisposition, like their beliefs, their whatever. So it's really hard to like sit here and try to prove its nature when you're doing it on adults that aren't, like that have already been exposed to nature and nurture and the environment and other biases. So I just think that the entire book in a way is just biased, and I know that they like admit it, they're like, I'm not trying to convince you and everything, but like it's kind of pointless in like the same regard though. If like you know everything you're saying, like you can't actually prove like, I don't know. It was just I could not do it.
It was like hard for me because like I know I'm like really ever since I don't know, like I've been really bad lately about like, in my personal opinion, like I don't like, because they were talking about how like you like knowing all these things may like help you like talk to someone who has different views than you and kind of understand that like you are distinctly different, like no matter if they believe the same things for you or not. But like sometimes I'm just like, for me, like if things that you're saying are like particularly harmful, like I don't want to talk to you, like I'm good. And like especially like explaining your own oppression to people, like that's not my job. So like it's really like hard, especially in like these type of classes where it's like you kind of do have to like see the other side or anything like that. Like it's really sometimes hard for me to like keep my mind to it because I'm just like no, like I'm good, like for real. Like I feel like there's better time like building your own community and like even building up your own personal community than like trying to explain to someone like why racism exists. Like no, I don't have time, I'm good. I don't know. But yeah, good.
Any other concluding thoughts?
Okay, I'll stop it.